What interesting topic do you have for me today?
Today will be something easy and very useful. Starting and stopping of SAP system.
Do you mean start SAP and stop SAP commands?
Well, not exactly. These commands are deprecated and no longer in use. There is a SAP note about this. As you can see, SAP announced this in 2015. There are at least two substitutes we can use. One is the SAP Management Console, which is accessible through the browser. The other option is SAP Control, and that's what we're going to talk about. Here is the entire command to start the system. Yes, this is a little longer than the usual SAP start, but it is also a very useful and versatile command with many uses.
Where do we start?
From the beginning, from determining the data of the system. Let's see the definition of my SAP system in SAP GUI. I select Properties and see the data that interest me. First of all, the system ID, which is A4H, but the instance number 00 is also very important. I memorize this data. Now I can move to my server's operating system. I have a root session on the server here. If I didn't know the system ID of my SAP, I could check the contents of the USR SAP directory. I easily recognize two system SIDs. A4H, which is my SAP system, and HDB, which is HANA database. Another option is to check etc passwd file for ADM users, like administrators. I see here HDB ADM, which is my HANA database administrator. The next one is A4H ADM, which is SAP system administrator. I'm interested in SAP system, so I can switch to the user responsible for A4H administration. Now I can use SAP control command. The next step is to check what instances the system consists of. I expect at least two of them: Central Services instance and the primary application instance. NR is mandatory and specifies instance number. I remember 00 from my SAP GUI configuration. Function is also required. In my case, this is getSystemInstanceList. As you can see, there are two instances in the system. Instance number is the second column. Instance number 1 is ASCS and consists of message server and enqueue server. Instance status is gray, which means that this is stopped. The same for 0, which is an ABAP instance. I can execute the getProcessList function for instance 00 to see what processes are running. The ABAP instance is stopped, so the processes also have a gray status. If you want to learn what dis plus work is, I recommend my video on work processes. I also check the getProcessList for instance 01 and see that both message server and onQueue are stopped. Why then do we have numbers in the PID column? I can show that there is no such process. Now we know something about the system. The diagram presents our knowledge. There is the A4H SAP system, which consists of two instances, 01, which is ASCS, and 00, which is an application instance. Both are gray at the moment, which means they are not running.
This is interesting, but we were supposed to start and stop the system, not monitor it.
As you wish. I'm now moving on to system startup. I use the start system function. It does not matter on which instance or on which server if there are more than one.
How is it possible that it started so quickly?
It didn't. This is asynchronous, so it only initiated the process. I can check status of the Central Services instance. Actually, this has been already started. I'm checking the ABAP instance. Here I can see that the dispatcher is in starting state, so still yellow. The same for Gateway and ICM, which are scheduled to start. Still the same. It could take time, especially on a bigger system. Let's wait a moment. And now everything is green. I can confirm this by logging to my system. I'm connecting using SAP GUI. This is my sandbox. And I'm logged, which proves that system has been successfully started. So I can log out and stop the system. The command is very similar, but instead of the start system function, I use stop system. Shutdown procedure starts from the application instance. So I'll be watching status of instance 0. This is still green. Shutdown is initiating. We should see a change soon. IG's watchdog is stopped. The same goes for the gateway. Now the dispatcher shutdown is underway, and finally everything is gray. The instance is stopped. The next in queue is ASCS. Message server is stopped, and queue also, so the system has been already stopped.
I understand everything so far, except for one thing. Just how did you know in what order to observe these instances? Why do they stop one at a time?
Central services must stop at the end, because without them, the application instances cannot work. Anyway, at startup it must be exactly the opposite. That is, ACS starts first. And how do we know this? Let's go back to the getSystemInstanceList function for a moment. The fifth column is start priority. Instances are started according to increasing priority. Instances with the same priority are started at the same time. As you can see, ASCS has a priority of 1, so it starts before the application instance, which has a priority of 3. I think this is quite simple and clear.
Yes, it is. But is it possible to start or stop just a single instance?
Yes, this is often used, for example, when you need to stop only one server. But you have to be careful with it and know what the consequences are. Let me start ASCS instance. I could use instance start function, but when it comes to a local instance, then start is simpler. Now I can check instance processes. All green, so I can start the application instance 00. I can check processes and I see that the instance is also starting. It always takes some time, so you have to be patient.
Yes, patience is an important feature of a basis administrator.
Indeed. However, now I can confirm that the system is up and running. Let me log into my sandbox. Everything is fine and I can leave this session in background. Now I can show you that you need to be careful when stopping single instances. I'm stopping ASCS instance. Let me now check the application instance status. As you can see, the status is yellow. Dispatcher warns that the system is not connected to the message server. We know that also in server is down, so we can expect more issues in the system, especially with database updates. It's a good idea to see how the system behaves now. I'll try to go to the SM50 transaction to see the work processes. I see that 2 of them are waiting for NQ response. This was actually expected. Let's see the status of updates in SM13. At the bottom you can see that updates were deactivated. When I go to the details, you can see that the deactivation was done by the system. I try to activate them manually and get a message that this is not possible. I will now prepare a command to launch the ASCS instance, but I won't start it yet. Instead, I'll go to transaction SIG to see if any critical errors will be seen. The transaction starts slowly. It is still starting up. And still the same thing, it's taking a little too long. I think because of the problem I caused, the system has already stopped responding. So I'm starting the ASCS instance now, and I'll see if everything is back to normal. The transaction still did not start, but after all, we have to wait a while for ASCS to fully start up. After that, the system takes a moment to restore operation. And it's already working. There are no errors. The status is green. I'll also check SM13 to see if the update started automatically. Yes, you can see at the bottom that they are active, so everything is fine. I can log off and stop the system. As a conclusion, I think it is worth showing on a diagram what happened during this exercise. First, I manually started the ASCS instance. I checked the correct status with the getProcessList function. Then I did the same with the application instance. The whole system had a green status, so I was able to log into the system without any problems. Then, to show the wrong activity, I stopped the ACS instance. This instantaneously caused a problem in the system and the application instance went to yellow status. I observed issues in the system. So I turned ACS on again. The system returned to normal. Finally, I initiated a shutdown of SAP. This time it was done in the correct order.
What common problems can I encounter when starting SAP?
I have an idea. Let's play a troubleshooting session. I am trying to log into SAP. It is not possible, and the reason is that the connection is refused.
Probably the system is not working.
You're right. So I will start the system using the function I learned earlier, and most likely everything will be fine.
Something is wrong. Also connection refused.
Yes, but I can try with the second instance.
The same situation. What does it mean?
Most probably, the start service hasn't been started. HTTP port of the service should listen on 50013 and HTTPS on 50014. But they are not listening. We can try to simply initiate start services for both instances using start service function of SAP control. I've just started one of the services, and as you can see that both ports are now listening. So I can repeat the same operation for the start service of the ASCS instance 01. The next step is the system start command. Let's see if it works.
Did it work, I guess?
We'll see. As you know, the SAP control command works asynchronously. We need to check the status of both instances. I begin with ASCS. The status is green. What about the application instance? Still yellow because we have information that the dispatcher is starting. I'll give it a moment to warm up and check soon if it started correctly.
I see server shutdown. Why?
Good question. Something must be wrong. Let's check again. We already have a gray status. Something has definitely gone wrong. But this gives us a chance to investigate the problem.
Where do we start the investigation?
The problem started when launching the 00 instance, specifically the dispatcher. So I go to the work directory of this instance to see what interesting stuff we have there. I sort the files from oldest to newest to see the current ones at the end. Let's start with stderr0, which is promising. It is not a large file. I see that there was an emergency shutdown of the dispatcher due to problems with work processes, so I will try to display the trace log of the dispatcher. This file is large for a change, so it will probably be hard to find anything meaningful quickly. Instead, I'll use grep to filter out lines containing error information. There are no specific errors related to dispatcher. Other than that, all work processes have terminated. So I'll take one of the processes and look at its log. I will also filter errors only. I see an interesting piece of information and the likely source of the problem. The process could not connect to the database. Before I even start checking the visible error code, which will indicate the specific cause, I can investigate whether the database is running.
Is there any tool for that?
We can start with R3trans. This connects to the database. Result code is 12, which means an error. Details can be checked in trans log file. I see that the connection was refused. The logical move would be to check how the connection to the database is defined. I am looking for the default key in the HDB user store. The connection points to my server to port 30213. I can check if the name server of the HANA database is listening on this port. I use the ss command for this, and as I expected, nothing showed up. So I go back to the root session on my server. I then switch to the administrator account of the HDB system, which is my database. By executing the HDB info command, I instantly notice that the database is not working. I know that maybe for beginners this is not very clear. However, it is worth noting the last line. SAP start service for this instance is running, and you can also see that the instance number is 02. I will take advantage of this fact and use the SAP control command to check the status of the instance. Gray, which means that the database is stopped as expected. I can start this with HDB start command. In fact, the popular HDB start command also uses SAP control in the background, as you might notice. Specifically, it uses start wait, which waits for the instance to launch before moving on.
Can start wait also be used with ABAP instances? This would be useful in scripts.
Yes, indeed. You can freely use both start wait and stop wait with timeout setting, which is also useful. I know it takes a while for the database to start, but it's HANA, and besides, it's a cheap mini PC. By the way, I recommend a video about how I installed a sandbox on a $130 mini PC. Okay, I see that it has already been launched. Great. I'll still do a quick check to make sure the status is green for sure and proceed. Yes, all green, so I'm exiting from HDB ADM shell and switch to A4H ADM.
Do I understand correctly that the database is already working, so SAP can be addressed?
Yes, exactly. Just in case, I'll still check via R3 trans for database connection. Return code 0 means that the test connection was successful. I must check what is the current status of my SAP system, because I left this partially started. Just in case, I'll perform stop system command first. I sent a command to stop the system. However, keep in mind that SAP control works asynchronously, so you should wait for some time. I will check from time to time if the processes have already stopped. I don't want to issue the command to run before I am sure that everything is stopped. As I said before, patience is an important quality of a wizard. I mean administrator. Now I am sure that all application instance and ASCS processes are stopped. Now, I issue a command to start the system. Again, I will have to wait a while for the effect. However, I hope that this time everything will work. ASCS has been already started. The application instance is in starting state. I think it looks promising this time. Still starting, at least not shutting down. Finally, all green! I need to confirm this success by logging into SAP. However, this is just a formality now. As I said, I got into the system without any problems. Now I can log out.
Great. But there were some of those operations. Could we do some kind of summary?
Sure, especially since we now have a wider picture of the system, including the database. This is the situation I had found at the beginning. Being unaware of the problem, I tried to start the system, but it turned out that none of the SAP startup services were working, so the sapcontrol command was ineffective. Therefore, I started the start services first. I then tried to start the system again, but soon found that this operation also failed. In the work process logs, I found information about problems in the database connection. I verified that indeed the database was not working. After switching to the database user, I turned it on. I did some cleanup. Finally, I was able to start up the SAP system with start system function. That's all. It even went smoothly.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And could you say a few more words about the SAP control program?
Sure. Let's begin with options. If you invoke SAP control without any options, you will get a short documentation, a brief description, options, and most importantly, a long list of functions. System start and stop is probably the most common use, but it's also a very small fraction of SAP control's capabilities, or, in fact, more of SAP start services. If you're wondering where this tool comes from, it comes with the SAP kernel.
I understand. But how does it work, and how does it relate to start service?
The SAP control tool is just a client that connects to the start service via HTTP. SAP Start SRV, the program responsible for the service, is also located in the kernel. Each instance has its own service. In my system, there are 3. One for the database, one for the ASCS, and one for the application instance. One grep to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. As you can easily guess, when I stop one of them, 2 should remain. Now I should not be able to connect to the instance service 00. And there you go, connection refused. I will show that now nothing is listening on port 50013. So I will restart the service and see if anything changes. Started. Now I can check ports for the instance 00. The first one is for the encrypted HTTPS connections. The second for HTTP. The analogous situation is for the services of the other two instances. Be informed, however, that sapcontrol does not use these ports called from the local server by default. Instead, in use are Unix domain sockets located in the TMP directory. The first letter S in the access rights field just stands for socket. Those are two sockets, equivalents of instance 00 service ports. By analogy, I can check the sockets for the other two instances. As an already last bonus thing, I'll still show you where you can find the commands that run all start services. In the USR SAP directory, you will find the SAP services file that contains them. This is a script for the root user, so it additionally sets the environment variables and calls the U option with the name of the correct user. D is from Damon.
This is a great story. But I still don't know how the start service knows what to run. Is it configured somewhere?
Yes, of course. Look again for a moment at the list of processes that support start service. The PF parameter specifies the profile of the instance. This is where all the information related to the startup sequence is stored. Let's take the SCS profile as an example. I'll display it to see what's inside. At the top, I see some definitions of important variables, such as instance parameters or kernel location. Next are directives setting environment variables for the environment that runs SAP services. Below that is the Copy SAP Executables section, responsible for the SAP CPE process that copies the kernel. I will take the message server startup section as an example for analysis. The first line specifies the name of the command that will be run as message server. The second line is to delete the old link, and the third line is to create a new one, to MSG server in the kernel directory. The line starting with restart program says that this command, with the profile as a parameter, is to be started and restarted in case of problems. In the end, I can further confirm that such a link exists because it was created at instance startup. Here it is. It works the same way for all components.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive explanation, although I definitely have enough for one time. By the way, your voice is somehow different today.
Maybe it's a cold and a sore throat. Or maybe magic. Wizards can change their voices. Either way, consider subscribing to the channel. May your system always launch wonderfully, and shutdowns only on your request. See you next time.